Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today on our session for the Reflect 20 Festival. So this is brought to you by the Agile Business Consortium. And today our talk is on welcoming change and responding mindfully. And we're really lucky to have our speaker, Kathy Berkidge. So Kathy is an agile coach and consultant, and she has been working and using mindfulness for over the last 20 years. And she's a really close advocate of the consortium. So we think very highly of Kathy, and we're really pleased to have her here with us. So before I hand over to Kathy, I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items, if I may. So firstly, if I could ask all of you guys to keep yourselves on mute, just whilst Kathy's going through her presentation. That would be lovely. And also to let you know that we are recording this session, and that's for the benefit of the festival website, that it will be part of the video archive afterwards, as well as being on our consortium website afterwards as well. So just to let you know, we are recording. If you have any questions for Kathy during the presentation, if I could ask you guys to pop them in the chat, that would be great. And we'll have some time at the end to come to them, and we can put those questions to Kathy and she'll have some time to answer them for you. So if you put them in the chat, that would be great. And also just to let you know that we'll be putting a link in the chat near the end of the talk, and that's just to gain a little bit of feedback from you guys about the session, and if there's anything you feel we can improve on in the format, as we've got a few more sessions from the consortium coming up in the festival. So that's everything from me. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Kathy. So Kathy, over to you.
Thanks so much, Rachel. It's awesome to be part of Agile20Reflect Fest, as well as part of the consortium. We have had a great relationship for many years now, me and the consortium. It's just obviously gone to a remote mode lately. So thanks, and it's been great to be part here, and thanks for thinking of me to join this consortium's sessions as part of this wonderful festival. So I'm from Melbourne, Australia. Yes, I've got the accent, so I apologise in advance if anybody can't understand me. I do try to slow it down, but I know the accent sometimes can be funny to deal with. So let's get going. I can't not mention the Manifesto. So happy 20th, right, Manifesto? It's awesome that we've got this wonderful piece put together by those 17 guys at Snowbird 20 years ago that gave us such a big head start into the Agile world. It was interesting though, my old days, back in the 90s, I was doing some crazy things called RAD and GAD, which were precursors to the DSTM framework, and of course precursors to what was officially called Agile. But that was my old school ways when I was a developer. So we can't not mention the Manifesto. It is our 20th anniversary. So this talk has actually been inspired by the Manifesto. It's something that I talk about with all my customers, when I'm coaching, all my classes. I can't mean it. But particularly that fourth line of the values, that fourth value from the Manifesto is what's inspired this talk. And it's all about responding to change over following a plan, which of course means while there is value in following a plan, there is more value in responding to change. We value responding to change more. So what does this mean? Well, plans are great, but when things change, and I mean when things change, not if, but when things change, we need to reassess. We need to evaluate what's happened. We need to look at the impacts and figure out what's the most valuable course of action for us now. Even within the Manifesto's principles, second principle talks about welcoming change, and it can happen at any stage in a project. And we need to think about change and harnessing it for the best value possible. So we know that change is part of the rationale around the whole Manifesto. We need to respond, adapt, be flexible, pivot, maintain business value, that maximize bang for buck, and of course, maximize customer delight and minimize waste in the face of continuous and constant change. Sure, well, that's all well and good. But how many of us understand this from the manifesto? It's not just, we all understand that change is going to happen, but can anyone think of anything that does not change? Have a think for a minute. Do you know of anything that you can think of that does not change? Mountains, they change. It's not perceivable every day. Well, sometimes it is when we have landslides or volcanoes erupt. Even mountains change subtly, and they're constantly changing. There's a term that we call, which I first came across within the Buddhist text, but it's used throughout science. It's a term called impermanence. So when we talk about mountains and change, we understand that the natural law of being is impermanent. Things are constantly changing. It's an inconvenient truth that everything changes, everything. Even our beautiful planet is in a constant state of flux. The weather changes, even the poles. Well, let's not talk about the climate, weather, atmosphere. It's in constant flux. Once again, impermanent. Galaxies, they're not permanent either. We know that from the Big Bang outwards, galaxies are constantly moving and shaking. Even now, we can look into the Hercules constellation in the night sky, and we can see a thing called NGC 6052, which is actually two galaxies. They're in the process of colliding. So they're changing. And even our beautiful Milky Way is one day going to smash into the Andromeda galaxy in about 3 to 4 billion years. So we probably don't need to worry about that tomorrow, but it will happen one day. So galaxies are impermanent. How about our own bodies? Well, we know we're impermanent. Our bodies are not the same as they were last year or the year before or when we were children, and certainly as we age, it's going to change. Our cells are dying and renewing constantly, so we're in constant state of change as well. So even our bodies are impermanent. So we know this. It's not something I'm telling you that's kind of, yeah, I didn't know that. We all know this on some sort of logical, rational level, and we can all say, yes, it's the natural law of things. But what happens when we're told to change the requirements of a project, or the scope of the project, or the customer tells us that we need to change something, or the budget changes, the schedule changes, the outside world changes, COVID hits, our own plans, our own holidays, dreams, hopes, meetings, parties. Then how do we feel? Raw, right? We know change happens, and we know change is expected. We know it's going to happen sometime, somewhere. We just don't know when. But when it happens, yeah, we know that one. So we know change has happened, and we know change is often out of our control. So here's the world of change. Here's the big wide world out there and everything that's constantly changing. Here's what we can control out of that. It's a very small fraction, and this graphic doesn't do it justice as to how little control we often have over things that are changing. And there's a smaller percentage again that we have some influence over whether things change or not change, or how they in fact change. Sometimes we change things ourselves or can influence and initiate change. But by and large, most of the world out there and changes are out of our control. Now, change happens for good and for bad, indifferent sometimes too. Change is constant. And without making, I'm not glossing it over, we know that sometimes change is unfair, unjust, hurtful, cruel, terrible things happen. I'm not trying to undermine any of that, but we know change does happen, and it's, you know, we can't pretend these things away. change is all over the place, in small amounts, in big amounts, tiny amounts, all over. Problem is, change, you know, we don't want change to happen sometimes and don't expect it, and it doesn't help us. So the problem with change, well, our poor old little brains, well, they're not that little, but our brains, they're wired for consistency. They like certainty. They like to be in their comfort zone. Our brain doesn't really want to be stressed, as much as we know that it's good to stress it out and form new connections and grow the brain. But really, it likes to be lazy, stay in that comfort zone, staying samey. So when things change and we don't like it, our brains don't like it, it's seen as a threat. Our brains think, goodness, something's happening. I'm being threatened. Oh no, oh no. So what happens is we've got in the lower, most primitive part of our brain, right next to our brain cell stem, is a part of the brain called the amygdala. So the amygdala is the most primitive part of the brain. It processes strong emotions and feelings and bodily sensations from the nervous system. And it is the oldest part of our brain. Most of you might be familiar with it. And then, of course, we've got the cerebral cortex and the prefrontal lobes, the most modern, our most modern Homo sapien brains, our advanced brains. That's where all logical, rational thinking happens, decision-making, planning. It allows us to process and deal with all the sensory input that we receive constantly. But when change happens, and it's something we don't like, our amygdala automatically might see that as some sort of threat. And if it's seen as a threat, our amygdala tries to help us. It's trying to protect us. It's trying to make sure we survive. And so it goes into the fight, flight, freeze response, which many of you have already heard of. So it's trying to help us to say, run away, run away, run away. You know, get ready to survive this attack. So it's from our ancestors, from when we were cavemen, this was really helpful because the world was full of danger. We had all sorts of dangers around us, and that's why it evolved to keep us out of physical danger and allows us to quickly react without having to spend so much time engaging the prefrontal cortex, so we could get away quickly. So it helps us from being injured, from death, from being invaded, and it was all about survival. However, when we are facing change in our modern days, our prefrontal cortex is still there. It doesn't go to sleep. It's also monitoring. And if it's something minor, if it's not seeing too bad, the prefrontal cortex stays in control and we can stay rational, calm, and deal with things in an appropriate sort of way. But unlike the automatic response of the amygdala, the response from fear and threats is controlled by you. But when the threat is strong, the amygdala acts quickly. It overpowers our ability to act from our frontal lobes. It overrides logical and rational thoughts often. This is great if we're being threatened in a life-threatening situation, but it can sabotage us when we're reacting the same way to modern day change. When change is really strong and it makes you feel angry or disappointed or aggressive, that response is really activated and can really result in all sorts of sudden, illogical, irrational behaviours. Things come out of our mouths without realising, and it triggers us. Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Intelligence, talked a lot about this being what we call amygdala hijack. So when our amygdala hijacks us, it disables us from being logical. Without our frontal lobes in action, we just simply can't think clearly. We can't make rational decisions or control ourselves. This can cause us all sorts of mischief in our defense mechanisms, where we might misbehave in the way that we respond to one another, act around our stakeholders, work together in a team. Remember, we're talking about Agile here. Agile teams thrive on collaboration and communication. And if things are changing and we're activated and our amygdala is hijacked in this way and we're starting to blurt things out or display anger or disrespect, it can do a lot of damage. The worst part is sometimes the change is perceived by our amygdala as being so bad, whether it's just a change to our project or product, or, heaven forbid, we're attacked by a saber-toothed tiger. The amygdala doesn't distinguish whether it's really life-threatening or just, well, not good, not fun, not convenient. And so our amygdala is causing all sorts of chemical reactions. Our adrenal glands are releasing all these stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, and they're all there to prepare our body for fighting or running away from danger. We have extra blood goes to our extremities, our heart rate increases, our breath rate increases, our pupils dilate, we get blood flow raised, increasing our blood sugar as well, which is really kind of a worry because you think of the diabetes epidemic and stuff like that. So these stress hormones are there to help your body survive. But when it's just an email from your boss saying, hey, we've got to change your requirements, and we're acting this way, it's not a saber-toothed tiger. You might notice it yourself. Your heart races, you feel sweaty palms, you might even get goosebumps. These are common reactions. So yeah, it can save our lives if we're really threatened in life-threatening situations, but it doesn't necessarily do us any good when we trigger these horrible defensive mechanisms when we're dealing with teams. So when we're hijacked into defensive, we really aren't seeing things clearly. We're not seeing things accurately. We're seeing things through the lens of the amygdala hijacking us, not logically at all. And it can certainly decrease our effectiveness in everything that we do. So it's important for us to learn to become aware of when we have been triggered, because it is an automatic thing that happens. It happens by default, but we have some control over it. We can learn to recognize this. Instead of reacting like a knee-jerk reaction, like being hit with a hammer on our knees or our joints, we can choose to recognize it and pause and stand back and respond from a more appropriate, calm and logical way by allowing ourselves to see this. The more self-aware we are, this awareness of being triggered can actually quell that amygdala hijack. We can dampen down this automatic reaction by saying, hang on a minute, I know what's going on. I detect you, hijack. I know what's going on here, and I'm going to take back control. It puts us back in the driving seat. So we can quell those reactions and we can cease and stop this hijack and activate that prefrontal cortex. So the first step is to actually acknowledge that you have been feeling threatened or stressed or triggered by whatever change has happened. And we have to be able to recognize that feeling of fight-flight response when it has been activated. We need to be aware of how our emotions and body reacts to these stresses, because they are seen as stresses, threats to us. So when we notice it, we can calm down and take control. We can remind ourselves, aha, amygdala, I know you're trying to help me, but I don't need your help right now. I'm going to remain calm. I can engage, so I can be aware. So one way we can do that is through breathing. But of course, this is where mindfulness comes in. So mindfulness is really about being present and being completely aware of what's happening in your thoughts and in your bodily responses, so you're more able to detect when you have been triggered. So we can shoot from when we are able to dampen down those reactions, we can choose to respond from that wider place, a wiser place. So that's why mindfulness is such a key tool to help us when we're triggered by change and when change is seen as a threat. So what is mindfulness? Out there are 1,000 different articles almost daily on mindfulness. And I believe that there's no one single right answer. I think there's a lot of aspects to mindfulness. So let's look at a few of them. The first one, the main one is, like I said in the previous moment, is it's about this awareness, noticing what is actually happening here and now, not just external environment, but also our internal environment, our minds, what's going on in there, and also what's happening in our body. Sometimes we can sense the body before the mind has got it. So it's feelings and sensations and all those responses. The opposite of mindfulness is what I call mindlessness. And unfortunately, research tells us that our minds aren't aware, truly aware of what's going on, because often we're busy thinking, daydreaming, fantasizing, reminiscing, remembering. Our minds actually aren't here and now. We're all over the place thinking about the future, making plans, thinking about the past, thinking about memories. And of course, whilst it sounds well and good, what's the harm in having daydreams and thinking? Well, research shows that quite often when we're thinking and in this mindless state, it's quite often negative thoughts that are being perpetuated. And this is where the part of the amygdala goes, I barely recognize whether it's happening in front of me now or I'm recalling it. If I'm recalling a stress event, if I'm recalling a change that I didn't like, the amygdala snaps back into action and says, oh, we must be threatened again. So we need to be more aware that when we are daydreaming and having these negative thoughts, it's perpetuating these negative states, which don't do us any good. And it's also bringing awareness into that inner voice, that inner chatter that we have that is constantly perhaps dinging. When something changes at work in our project, we might think, oh, they should have known better, or I should have known better, or oh, I'm silly. That inner voice can really perpetuate that negativity, which once again can cause some sort of stress effects. So awareness was really about being aware of that and dampening things down. Mindfulness also has a concept of removing judgments or perceptions and seeing things as they really are, not just how we think they are. We're able to observe our thoughts and our feelings from this open, spacious kind of point of view and witness them in a very objective way that allows that beautiful prefrontal cortex to think things through logically, rationally, and choose the right course of action. We don't see things as good, we don't see things as bad, we just see things as they are and then go forward with the best way. So it allows that logical brain to really engage and see the facts, not just what we cloud them over with our bias, with our habits, with our beliefs, those types of things. Mindfulness also has the concept, or the attribute, I should say, of deliberate attention. We actually have 100% control of what you do and do not pay attention to. The problem is we let our minds wander, and we let our minds wander too easily. It happens all the time. Sometimes we're barely aware of what we're paying attention to because our minds are wandering. We might be stirring a pot on the stove, but we're not really stirring the pot because our mind is thinking. So that deliberate attention allows us to say, what am I really putting that beam of my attention on? Is it to negativity? Is it to overthink and reminisce? Or am I thinking about and bringing my attention to what's really happening right now? And that, of course, increases our awareness. If we bring our attention to our thoughts, we bring our attention to our bodily sensations, we can better enable us to detect that hijacking effect that happens when we're triggered by the amygdala. So we can better detect And that means we can better respond as well. Once again, the last aspect is for me about openness and presence. Nothing really else. We're open to whatever unfolds right here and now, because quite often it's out of our control anyway. Of course, if it's in our control, we act. But being open means we don't reject anything. We reduce our expectations, and we're able to let go of what we thought when things change. So it allows us to direct our energy more wisely, and then we can respond with that control and really take control of our beautiful brains. It's a natural state of mind. It's really about coming back to that reality of what's in front of us now. Mindfulness does not let us control change. It doesn't get rid of stress, but it allows us to be more open and observing of what's really happening, to not let our thoughts and these reactions overrun us. We can get into action, we can be more decisive, rather than worrying and going over things over and over. We can have a positive attitude saying, yep, it's happened. Okay, now we're going to get through it. Let's set into motion what we need to. We need to move forward and not let rumination get in the way, that whole replaying over and over. So it can enable us to have a more positive attitude. So we can quell that inner voice of negativity. We can detect the hijacking and think, I'm going to do my best now. This is what we have to face, and I'll get help when I need it. So we reorient how we see things. We see things openly and aware. Non-judgment reduces that negativity. If we're not judging, we don't feel everything's bad and horrible, and that can quell the amygdala as well. So how do we practice mindfulness? It's the easiest and the hardest thing. Firstly, we have an informal practice, and which is really any time, day or night, the ability to just recall, clear our minds, and really bring that awareness in. So it means a bit of, at any point of time, even right this moment, I invite you to stop what's happening in your mind and bring to attention, how do you feel? What's feeling in my body? What am I thinking? What was I thinking? It's that ability to stop and check in. What's happening up there, brain? What am I thinking? We're so barely aware of our thought processes so often. So it's that ability to catch ourselves at any time and bring that focus of awareness and attention and figure out what's really happening now. You snap out of this kind of daydreaming, sleepwalking kind of way to really bring a focus into what's really happening within me right this minute. And we can also check in and say, well, how am I seeing this situation? What perceptions am I putting on this? Am I biased? Am I clouding things with my beliefs or my expectations? So we can figure out, where is our attention and where should it be? Is my attention on these negative thoughts? Maybe they're not the most constructive thing to do. Maybe I should redirect my attention into more productive thoughts and more productive courses of action. So we can direct our energy, and hopefully we can detect if it's wanders as well. That awareness allows us to detect if our attention has wandered again. So that needs practice. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's not something that's super easy that comes, without effort. So we have to prepare ourselves and train ourselves. And that's where the formal practice comes in. And that might not be any surprise to you, is what we refer to as meditation. Meditation, much like going to the gym and lifting heavy weights to improve our muscles, or maybe running on the treadmill so we can jog better, it's strength training for our brain. It's strength training for our mind. It's strength training for our awareness. We can use meditation as a formal way of getting our mind used to becoming aware, directing our attention, and detecting where our attention has wandered, detecting when our body, detecting those sensations in the body, detecting what we are thinking, and becoming aware of it. So then once we're aware of it, we can redirect it. when we go through our days without that awareness, we haven't got time to redirect our thoughts because we're not even aware of what they are. Excuse me. So formal practice is what helps us become more mindful in our day-to-day, anytime, anywhere practice. Just like when we've got bigger muscles by going to the gym and lifting all those weights, we can lift bigger weights. When we're more skillful in our meditation practice, we're more able to easily detect and remain more aware in our day-to-day lives. And that, of course, enables us to easily detect when we've been triggered, detect those mind states that aren't productive and perhaps are triggering those defense mechanisms that are so naughty and can cause us so much mischief. So catching ourselves when we're going into those states can enable us to deal with change much more calmly, with more ease and objective, staying focused. I was going to give this a try, but I am actually going to skip over this today. I hope you don't mind. I was going to do a bit of this meditation with us together. We'll see if we have time at the end, but I'm going to move on and talk about a little bit about resilience. So going back to change, we know that so much happens that we don't want. Things don't happen that we do want. It doesn't have to be big things, even small things can actually trigger us. Yes, the prefrontal cortex is there trying to monitor, but sometimes these reactions can be strong because of our emotions, because of our past, because of habits. So we need to figure out how we deal with these events, and that's the key to resilience. It's our mental ability to cope, which is the key. We can learn from these patterns that we form. And resilience is not about not having stress. Resilient people are not people who suddenly magically have found a way to never be stressed, to never have to worry about things, to never have to deal with change that they don't like. It doesn't mean that they don't have anxiety or sadness or fear or anger. Resilience is really about that acceptance and moving forward from that situation. We know many things are often beyond our control, but if we hold on to them, we hold on to these emotions, we hold on to these thoughts and we perpetuate them, they keep us locked down. They keep us, locked down, terrible word to say right now, but they keep us, in place. We aren't able to move on. We're stuck. We literally get stuck in our own minds and the amygdala just runs away with us and we're constantly in this stress state. So we need this mindfulness, dare I say it, it's just one tool of resilience. It's not a magic cure. Mindfulness doesn't make us resilient, but it's one of many tools we can use to bring that awareness in, to detect when we are being stuck and help us move on. When we talk about resilience, it's defined as the ability to cope with adversity and bounce back, but it's also referred to as the capacity to deal with unexpected changes and circumstances, which is, of course, responding to change over following a plan. We know that stress is everywhere, but we know that stress happens all sorts of things, especially in these COVID times when we're bombarded with bad news. So the amygdala can respond to this, or we can become aware of it, quell that amygdala, and prevent it. We can breathe, we can bring awareness into what's happening, we can slow things down, focus on what's happening and respond to the situation. And practicing mindfulness and these techniques of becoming aware of when we're triggered can really help. And the more you do it, the more likely you're going to be able to cope with change and stressful situations more easily in the future. Studies show that the people who are considered the most resilient aren't the people who have never had stress, but the people who have had to deal with it the most. You get better at it the more you deal with it. Not that we want it to constantly bombard us with all these terrible, stressful situations. Sometimes things are unpredictable, and so is the future. We're let down, expectations, anger. There's no point pointing the finger. There's no point resisting. Some things we just can't change. It's not going to help us. we need to be able to take control of what we can change and adjust our mindset and our attitude to change. As we become more mindful, we can build inner resources, inner resilience. We can avoid seeing crises and change as unsurmountable, and we can get that confidence of we can get through this. We will work with this. Despite this change, we will overcome. So being mindful allows us to decenter that change and stress response, that threat response, be able to pause, step back, reflect what's going on, shift our perspective, look at our options, and then choose more wisely. I want to end with my favourite quote, which I think changed my life more than 20 years ago when I was dealing with a lot of change and unhappy circumstances in my life. It's by a 7th century sage, Buddhist monk and master. Why worry about something if it can be remedied? So what he's saying here is, if something can be done, if you can put some plans in and respond and affect something, there's no need to worry, no need to be stressed, no need to let that amygdala keep in control. Put your plan into action, do what you need to, and get on with the job. He goes on to say, why worry about something if it cannot be remedied? That means if we can't change things, the only option we really have is to accept it, to move on, and figure out what we can do. Acceptance, though, is not about giving up. It's about getting up and going forward. So mindfulness can help us increase and accept the fact of whatever's changed in front of us and keep a cool head, look at things objectively, and of course, be happier, healthier individuals. I've left a little bit there. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, but mindfulness has a lot of benefits. Many of them are scientifically researched. Peer-reviewed papers have been done by universities all over the world, Harvard, Yale, Institute of Technology in California. So many of them all over the world, actually. There are more than, as I said, 5,000 peer-reviewed papers that have been published. But even though I've put some ideas up there about some benefits of mindfulness, ignore them all if you want to. You don't need to worry about that. I always say the same thing. Try it for yourself. If you notice some benefit, fantastic. You can read all the research papers in the world, but until you try it for yourself, you won't know if there's benefits that you might get. So that's all I'm going to speak about now, and I would like to turn it over to any questions or comments anyone would like to have. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was just, I know so many of us at the consortium are really passionate about mindfulness and the connecting, how it connects to Agile, and so that was just so wonderful. I could listen to you talk about that for a lot longer. But we do have a few questions in, so I'll go through some of them if I may. So first one we have is from Emily. So Emily's asked, are some people more susceptible to amygdala hijack, or is it that others have developed the mindfulness muscle?
Now, I'm not a psychologist. I always like to say that I'll leave the science stuff because it's too hard for me. I believe that there are conditions that people are more susceptible. And that's, you know, when I'm talking about mindfulness and this thing, I am talking about people without those kinds of perhaps disabilities, for example, which we know that there are. So there are some people who are more susceptible, but if we take out those people who are, you know, if we just think of, you know, the average Joe without any of those disabilities or impediments that might occur through all sorts of disease or birth problems, whatever it might be. And again, we know that those people, there's a different wiring that's happening in their brain. They physiologically have different brain systems happening that aren't the same. But people who are better able to control their amygdala, some of those people don't even know anything about mindfulness. They actually are naturally more able to respond. You probably know them yourself. You might have the most intelligent person who has no control, and you'll have someone who's a bit of the average and they've got this absolute poise in any situation. And maybe there's nothing to do with mindfulness, but definitely mindfulness is one, the muscle, as you said, the mindfulness muscle is something that can help us, notwithstanding, as I said, those people with perhaps any of those disabilities that we're talking about. So for the average Joe, we can always increase our mindfulness muscle, and that can be increased forever. Like the more you practice, the more it's increased. The more it's increased, the more likely you're dealing with change and stress with that even keel and being able to move on thoughtfully and resiliently.
Thank you, Kathy. That's brilliant. And Emily's asked another question in the chat, which is a great one. So she said, in your experience, have you spoken to team members who are more reluctant to accept mindfulness and struggle with self-awareness? Are there any tips that you have that in kind of sensitively approaching those team members?
Well, that's where your own mindfulness practice can come in. There's only one person who can be mindful: yourself. You can't force it onto somebody else. Mindfulness is something that you can practice. So when someone else who is not acting mindfully, who is perhaps triggered, perhaps behaving or reacting badly, yourself, you can choose your reaction to that person. And instead of snapping at them and saying, stop it, or whatever, snapping at them, acting irrationally, you can kind of come to your own senses and say, wow, they've been triggered. I can empathize with that because I get triggered. So how would I like to be responded to when I'm being triggered, when I'm not seeing the world clearly, when I'm feeling like the world's on top of me because things are changing? So I think mindfulness, though I don't speak about it much in many of these sessions, allows us to stop when we see somebody else in that state, create that empathy, and then choose to approach them from that point of view, perhaps by asking them, hey, how are you feeling? What's going on for you? Maybe giving them that vessel that they can vent to. Because sometimes a vent can be that. And then it might be, if you are comfortable, you might say, maybe we can just take a few deep breaths and let's see if we can see this a little bit more clearly, a little bit more calmly, without saying, stop being ridiculous or whatever it might be. So mindfulness helps us deal with those difficult people by not letting ourselves be triggered by their behaviours, because that's another trigger just the same as, sudden change. And it can definitely enable us to perhaps approach them more, again, people are people. You can't bucket everybody that this way is going to work for everybody, but we can certainly try to think about more appropriate ways of dealing with other people.
Thank you, Kathy. That's such a brilliant answer, because then it kind of relates back to, doesn't it, how people within the team are connecting and kind of reaching out to one another, which feeds back to that agile teamwork and culture. So thank you. And we've got a question here from Claire. Thank you, Claire. So Claire has asked if you could recommend one book worth reading on the subject of mindfulness and resilience, what would it be?
Wow. I don't know whether you've seen those bookshelves. I'm having a look now. This is terrible. See, I've read so much. I've studied a lot. I'm actually studying some interpersonal neurobiology with Dan Siegel, who is a wonderful scientist. I also know of all sorts of different texts, of all sorts of different traditions. Each of them are so too many. I know. Probably, I'm just going to grab it. Oh, no, I won't grab it. It's a book that one of the ones that I think is one that isn't too Buddhisty, and I know that I don't mean that in a bad way. I learned mindfulness through Buddhism first and foremost, so I refer to those texts as the ones that I find the most valuable. The one that's a bit more sciencey, I guess, is by Jon Kabat-Zinn, one of the four founders of the mindfulness movement. And he's got a heap of books actually, but the one I liked is called Coming to Our Senses. It is this thick though, but it is the comprehensive guide, and it talks about a lot of aspects towards mindfulness. It doesn't go too heavy on the science. It doesn't go too heavy on, you know, traditional Eastern philosophy either. I think it's a wonderful book that's very comprehensive.
That's
find
awesome.
out a bit of commission from that now.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, you should. You should. So that was Coming to Our Senses by
Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Okay, thank you. Just so everyone's got a chance to write that down in case they want to go and check that out afterwards.
So Jon, I have to remember how to spell his last name. Kabat-Zinn.
Perfect.
There we go.
Ah, marvelous. It's in the chat there for you guys in case you want to check out that book that Kathy's recommended.
Any of his books I'd recommend as well.
Oh, marvelous. Thank you. So I have a question. I can't see any more in the chat at the moment. So I was just going to ask Kathy and it's quite similar to Claire's in a sense, actually. For anyone who is perhaps new to meditation or has never done it before, but has kind of listened to this talk and wants to give it a go, how would you recommend going about it for kind of people that are trying it for a first time? Would you recommend particular ways of doing it, or what do you think is the best way?
There's so many wonderful tools we have today. There's so many amazing resources out there. There's amazing websites and apps, and I'm not going to go through them all because there literally are dozens today. A quick Google will very quickly put you onto all sorts of great sites. The one that I like reading the most is one called Mindful Leader. It talks a lot about leadership, which I think is very important for us Scrum Masters and Agile project managers. But there are mindful.org. There's just so many. There's so many. And also the apps. There's a lot of apps. There are podcasts. There are on YouTube so many guided meditations as well. Most people find the best way to get started is through instruction, through a app, podcast, or guided meditation. It's not something you can do easily straight away by yourself. It does take time. The thing is, because there are so many choices, you might find some you'll like because of the voice or the pace or the way it's done, and others you don't. So I always encourage people to try out a few. Again, in your favorite app store, if you put in mindfulness, you'll find dozens of apps come through. I myself, I hate to say it, I have my own Geshe, my own instruction from my own tradition. I've been studying under His Holiness the Dalai Lama and a whole heap of lineage masters from that. And so I use those, but I don't recommend that they're the first point of call for other people because they are Buddhisty ones, but there's heaps of wonderful ones, especially ones that really talk through the science of that amygdala hijack and really great ways of detecting when that's been activated as well. So again, Google is your friend, and the App Store. I think the one that I've seen, I've used it, I've had a look at quite a lot of them. I'm not a big phone user. I'm a bit of a technophobe when it comes down to it, but there are some really brilliant ones out there. And the one that I hate to even go to my phone because I can't recall the name off the top of my head, but if I grab my phone, I'll be able to show you. Healthy Minds is the one that I'm really found really fantastic as well. Healthy Minds. And it's an app, it's free, and it's once again by the one of the universities in the USA. So it's a very, very science-based. It talks through the science, it talks through the emotions, and it really is a wonderful way to have a very long explanation. And it's got all these information and guided meditations to really help you get started.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Kathy. I don't see any more questions, so we'll round up for today. But just a huge thank you to you, Kathy, for your time in going through this. I've found it really insightful and really helpful, so I hope everyone here has as well. Just as you can see on your screen now, you can stay in touch with us at the Agile Business Consortium for any of the kind of latest business agility news. So do come over to our website and sign up for our mailing list. You can look at membership and some of the other resources that we have available for you. We're actually working towards, I can see Kathy pointing, we're actually working towards a virtual conference later in the year, which is the first time we will be doing a virtual one. And we're looking for some speakers. So if you're interested in speaking, by all means, come on over and have a look and submit, because it would be great to have you there. Also, thank you to my colleague Emily. I've just seen she's popped in the feedback link in the chat. So if you'd like to share some feedback about this talk and how we can improve moving forward with the festival, do let us know, because we really appreciate hearing from you. And other than that, just a huge thank you to everyone that's joined us today. Thank you so much to Kathy for your talk, really, really insightful. And yes, just thank you so much. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival, and we hope to see you at more events soon. Thank you so
very
much.
And I invite anybody to get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn if you need to find me, if you'd like to learn more or anything further, do get in touch. It's been awesome, and thank you for having me, Rachel and Emily. I look forward to working with you throughout the year, and keep well and stay safe.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.